Collapse and comeback. In December 2023, Adobe walked away from the biggest deal in its 40-year history. A $20 billion bid to buy a rival called Figma, dead, blocked by regulators. And it cost Adobe $1 billion just to walk away. But the collapse of the deal wasn't the real danger. The real danger was already inside the building. To understand what was at stake, you have to understand what Adobe is. Chances are, Adobe has touched something you saw today. Every PDF you opened. Every photo quietly retouched before it reached you. Photoshop, Illustrator, Acrobat, Premiere Pro. For 3 decades, if you worked with images, video, or documents for a living, you paid Adobe a monthly fee to do it. In 2013, Adobe made a bet that looked reckless at the time. It stopped selling software in a box and pushed everyone onto a subscription called Creative Cloud. You rent the tools forever. It worked spectacularly. By its 2023 financial year, that subscription empire pulled in over $19 billion. Adobe wasn't a company creatives used. It was the toll booth every creative had to pass through. And then, almost overnight, technology arrived that threatened to knock the toll booth over. The first threat had a name: Figma. Figma was a web-based design tool, the kind of thing a new generation of designers actually wanted to use, and it was eating into the corner of the market Adobe had tried to own with a product called XD. So in September 2022, Adobe did what dominant companies do when a young rival gets dangerous. It tried to buy it. The price was staggering, about $20 billion, roughly half in cash and half in Adobe stock. It was one of the largest acquisitions of a software startup ever attempted. Adobe's own investors blinked. The stock dropped on the news because $20 billion for a company with only a few $100 million in reported revenue looked wildly expensive. Adobe's message was simpler: buy the future before it competes with you. But you cannot always buy the future. Regulators in Europe and the United Kingdom looked at the deal and saw something they didn't like: the dominant player in design software swallowing its fastest-growing challenger. In Britain, the Competition and Markets Authority warned the merger could harm competition. The European Commission opened a deep investigation and signaled it could demand Adobe sell off products to win approval, reportedly including core parts of its creative software. Adobe decided the price of approval was too high. Selling the crown jewels just to complete the purchase made no sense. 15 months after the deal was announced, both sides gave up. On the 18th of December 2023, Adobe and Figma announced there was no clear path to regulatory approval and called the whole thing off. Because Adobe was the one walking away, it owed Figma a breakup fee, $1 billion, paid for nothing. $1 billion gone, with not a single new product to show for it. For most companies, that would be the whole story. For Adobe, it was a warning shot that the ground had already shifted underneath it. Here's what had changed. While Adobe spent 15 months fighting for Figma, a completely different threat had gone from science project to household name. In 2022 and 2023, a wave of generative AI tools learned to create images from a single line of text. Type a sentence, get a picture. Tools like Midjourney and DALL-E could produce in seconds what once took a skilled artist hours in Photoshop. For a company whose entire empire was built on the idea that making images is hard and needs expensive, specialized software, this was existential. If anyone could conjure artwork by typing, what exactly were millions of people paying Adobe for? The toll booth suddenly had a road running straight around it. Adobe's answer was to build its own. In March 2023, it launched a generative AI called Firefly. But Adobe made one choice that set Firefly apart, and it was a legal choice as much as a creative one. Its rivals had trained their AI on enormous piles of images scraped from the open internet, including copyrighted art whose owners never agreed to it. That left a cloud of lawsuits hanging over anyone who used them commercially. Adobe trained Firefly mainly on its own stock photo library and public domain content, images it already had the rights to. The pitch to nervous businesses was blunt. Use Firefly and you won't get sued for what it makes. In a gold rush full of legal landmines, Adobe sold the one thing large companies actually wanted: a version of AI art that was safe to use at work. Then Adobe did the thing its rivals couldn't. It had spent 30 years putting Photoshop on the world's computers, and in May 2023, it dropped Firefly straight into it, as a feature called Generative Fill. Instead of asking creatives to abandon their tools for some new website, Adobe put the AI inside the tool they already lived in. Select a patch of a photo, type what you want, and the software paints it in, extending a sky, removing a person, inventing a background that was never photographed. The distribution Adobe had spent decades building suddenly became its sharpest weapon. In one move, hundreds of millions of existing users had generative AI one click away. The numbers came fast. Firefly generated its first billion images within roughly 3 months of launch, one of the fastest adoptions any creative tool had ever seen. By 2025, Adobe said users had generated more than 20 billion assets with it. On paper, this looked like a company that had turned the AI threat into an AI engine, faster than almost anyone expected. The bet appeared to be working, but the people who mattered most weren't convinced. Because here is the paradox at the center of this story. Adobe kept posting record numbers and revenue climbed to more than $21 billion in its 2024 financial year, up double digits. By almost every traditional measure, the company was thriving, and yet its stock fell, down more than 20% across 2024, even as sales hit all-time highs. Investors were asking a harder question than whether Adobe was growing. They were asking who captures the value of AI. New rivals like Canva were reportedly racing past $4 billion in annual sales by giving away the kind of design power Adobe charged a premium for. When your product gets easier for everyone to copy, being the incumbent can become a liability instead of a moat. So did Adobe pull off the comeback? The honest answer is that the jury is still out. It did something rare for a dominant company facing disruption. Instead of denying the threat, it built the threat into its own products, fast, and gave nervous businesses a version of AI they could actually trust. That is a real achievement. But the deeper worry hasn't gone away. In a world where making an image is nearly free, it is not obvious that the company selling the expensive image-making software gets to keep collecting the toll. Adobe bet its creative empire that it could own the AI future the same way it owned the last 30 years. As of 2026, that bet is placed. The chips are down, and no one, including Adobe, knows yet whether it wins. The lesson of Adobe isn't really about software. It's about what happens when the thing you sell suddenly becomes easy. You can own a market completely, and still have to fight for your life the moment the moat drains. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. New collapses and comebacks land 3 times a week.